Thank you. No, put me on now. Take that picture front and back and send to me. I can put me on now.
Your
Okay.
voice is on. I put comment.
Picture, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Please, panelists, please unmute yourselves. I've muted everybody. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the NITCOM NGX Diaspora Speaker Series. We have today a distinguished panel. We have Dr. Onyema Ogbuagu, who's here with us, Honorable Abike Dabiri, and Dr. Sani Aliyu. Dr. Onyema Ogbuagu, I guess, is our special guest today. He's going to be speaking to us about the COVID-19 vaccine. He'll talk to us about what it is, the myths, the realities. He's an associate professor of infectious diseases at Yale University and the lead researcher at Pfizer for COVID-19. And then we also have Honorable Abike Dabiri-Erewa, the chairman and CEO of NITCOM, the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission. And also Dr. Sani Aliyu, the coordinator of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 for Nigeria. So that said, welcome everybody. Welcome Dr. Ogbuagu. Nice to have you here. Welcome Honorable Abike Dabiri, and welcome Dr. Sani Aliyu. And I forgot to mention, we also have Professor Rotimi Jalyesimi in the house too. Welcome, sir. Okay. That said, we'll hand it over to Honorable Abike Dabiri-Erewa to give us some opening remarks.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and you're welcome. Or good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever part of the world you are. You're welcome to another edition of a Diaspora Speaker Series being put together by the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission in partnership with X, led by Obina there. Dr. Onyema Ogbuagu, it's really a pleasure and privilege to have you here today. And I'm sure not just Nigerians are excited to hear you speak. Everybody all over the world is excited to listen to you this evening. Dr. Sani Aliyu, coordinator, PTF, you've done a great job. Thank you very much for being on this panel today. And of course, Professor Jalyesimi, who has also done so much in this issue of COVID there in the UK. And I welcome everyone listening to this, what I think will be a very exciting session. For us in the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, one of the things we've made a priority is to celebrate the best of ourselves. And tonight, Dr. Onyema, we celebrate you, we commend you. On behalf of Mr. President, I want to say thank you for all you've been doing. Now, as we were discussing some time ago, some people will say to me, why is it that you're always congratulating Nigerians who are succeeding abroad? And I said, who was doing that before? Nobody. In the past, it's all about the bad stories. It's about drugs, fraud, and all that. And then the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, which is just about a year and a few months old, came into existence in Nigeria. And we said we must change the narrative. We are not a country of fraudsters or drug dealers. We are made up of beautiful, brilliant, intelligent, hardworking, resilient Nigerians like you, Dr. Onyema, and you're joining us this evening. So for those who say, oh, you keep congratulating, I will continue to congratulate. We will continue to celebrate the best of ourselves because nobody will do it but ourselves. And I know, Dr. Onyema, as you speak with us, you tell us your story, your background story from how you grew up in Nigeria and moved over to America. And I'm sure we also want to hear from you. What is that Nigerian thing in you that you think has also helped you and led you so far? So we look forward to a very exciting conversation this evening. For us in the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, we will continue to work at tapping into the power of the diaspora. Our greatest asset is not our oil, it's not what we have, but it's about our people, our human resources in the diaspora. Again, people ask, would you, Dr. Onyema, have excelled if you didn't find your way to America? That is for posterity to judge. But for us is that you are there, you are in the diaspora, Nigeria must connect with you. We need to work together to build this country, Nigerians at home and Nigerians in the diaspora. Once more, on behalf of Mr. President himself and the people of Nigeria, congratulations, Dr. Onyema. We wish you many more successes ahead as we look forward to a beautiful and exciting conversation with you this evening. So welcome everyone to this session this evening.
Cool. Thank you, Honorable Abike Dabiri-Erewa. So we'll move on now to Dr. Onyema Ogbuagu. So Dr. Onyema Ogbuagu, please, we all know, we've heard a little bit about your story, the fantastic work you've done with Pfizer and everything, but we also know that you made this journey from Nigeria, right? Nigeria is an integral part of, I think, what we believe is your success in the United States. So if you can please tell us a little bit about your background, your journey, and some of the, what Nigeria instilled in you and how you've, actually used that to facilitate some of the things that you've been doing over here.
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say I feel really honored to be here today and to be with my people, if you will. And I'm just grateful for the honor you've all done me to have us address an issue that's near and dear to my heart. And I'm grateful for all the recognition and accolades and etc. So, just a bit of my background. So, there's also some occasionally inaccurate information out there. I think people have dug into my CV and resume and background. But anyway, so I was born in the US as an identical twin. So I have an identical twin brother who is actually in the finance industry. He's a vice president, one of the big banks in the US. His name is Chibuzo. And I was in the US at the time when my parents were initially pursuing their PhDs, and eventually my dad actually was a faculty at Yale. Both my parents are professors, and you can imagine growing up in that kind of household that they instill values in you, especially how important it is to make education your number one priority, how important it was to study and try to set yourself apart as early as primary school. So I owe a lot to my parents, Professor Chibuzo and Professor Stella Ogbuagu, who promised to attend this if they will. Then I moved to Nigeria when I was five years old. So I do owe a lot of my early upbringing and early schooling and training to Nigeria. I went to a private primary school in Calabar, where we lived. Actually, we lived in Maiduguri in Borno State first for 2 years before we moved down to Calabar, where I did my primary school. I went to a federal government college. I went to Federal Government College of Kigwe, which I was there for the entire duration, and I had so much fun. I was actually a boarding student in Okigwe. I think a lot of my hardiness and resilience and toughness probably came from that experience, being away from parents and being independent and learning. After my secondary school, I went to the University of Calabar, where I trained in medicine. Obviously, it was supposed to be a 6-year journey, but during the time I was in school, we had a couple of the ASU strikes, for those of you that remember. And so a 6-year journey became an 8-year journey, quite interestingly. And I remember that in University of Calabar, we didn't always have all the resources to train, as you can imagine. However, I remember the effort that my teachers, consultants, professors put in to instill in us that they taught us about things we didn't see. They taught us about things that we didn't experience. And they reminded us that even though we were training in a resource-limited setting, that we were being trained for the world. And many times when I look back at my background and my success in my medical career, I think I owe a lot to the training I had in the University of Calabar. When I graduated, I moved to the US to do my specialty and subspecialty training. I did my primary care and internal medicine residency in the Mount Sinai School of Medicine program at Elmhurst Hospital in New York City. And then also after my residency, I was elected to be chief resident, which I appreciated that honor, and then went on to Yale to do my infectious disease training. And so Yale also played a pivotal role in my infectious disease career. That's where I got knee-deep into clinical research, joined the clinical trials program, had a lot of mentorship along the way. So like any other person with a career that the successes that you celebrate in your career, you can always trace them back to sometimes the little inputs people did in your life and some of the big inputs. I just want to highlight some additional things. So since I've worked at Yale, Yale has been gracious to allow me to go back to Africa to do some work, which I'd always desired to do. So I supported Rwanda through the Human Resources for Health program from 2013 to 2018. I spent 2 to 3 months every year in Rwanda teaching infectious disease, supporting research. And I'm sure some of my friends in Rwanda are on this call, and I made many good friends. You know, I think we did some very important work, and I like to think that I contributed to training a generation of physicians in Rwanda, and those relationships are still ongoing. They invited me back in February to do a talk, and I appreciate that. And then also I am currently working in Liberia. I have a grant training Liberians in infectious disease. So Liberia was another country that was hit hard by Ebola, and at some point Liberia had only 50 doctors in the entire country. And so I've been working with them in their postgraduate residency training programs to help, you know, shore up the quality of their programs. We've achieved accreditation by the West African College of Physicians, and also supporting really developing the first ever trained infectious disease specialist in Liberia. Nigeria has helped out with that. So I went to University of Jos, and University of Jos is partnering with Liberia to do the training of the first ever infectious disease doctor from Liberia. So thanks to Nigeria. And we've also recruited from Nigeria as well to provide faculty for Liberia in the training program. And right from the headship of the Department of Medicine there to faculty are really being supported by Nigeria. So it's been nice for me to incorporate Nigeria to my work. The last thing I'll mention in my background is I had always been interested in clinical trials, which became a key part of my career. And so about 5 years ago, after being in the research program at Yale for a while, I assumed the directorship position of the clinical trials program. It's an HIV clinical trials program. We focus on HIV therapeutics, so that's my thing, where we do anything from phase 1 through phase 3 post-marketing studies. And it's a very exciting role because we get to be the first many times to evaluate either new treatment or prevention strategies. We get to do clinical trials to advance novel therapeutics. And it can be so gratifying to work on, you know, a drug and see it go through first human trials to actually being approved for use. And so you can imagine when COVID-19 hit, I also immersed myself in the clinical trials. So I supported the development of remdesivir. We've since published that, and it's been approved by the FDA. We're working on a repurposed HIV drug also for treating COVID-19. And more recently, you know, my work on the Pfizer vaccine as the principal investigator for Yale. So I just want to clarify, I don't work for Pfizer. I'm an academician and run a research program. And so conducted the clinical trials for Pfizer vaccine at Yale. It's been just an amazing experience to be a principal investigator on a vaccine that is the first one that's received at least emergency use authorization here, and that hopefully will be rolled out soon and marks really what I hope will be the beginning of the end of the pandemic. Last thing I'll say is that, you know, since the vaccines are approved, you know, I'm a self-appointed ambassador for the benefits of vaccines. And I hope that through our interaction today, as we get to talk about vaccines, I think social media can be a good thing and a bad thing. I think that there's a lot of myths and misconceptions there. And I hope that through our intercourse today that we should be able to address some of those. So thank you for having me and looking forward to the conversation.
Cool. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ogbuagu. Very interesting background. It's a long journey. I know how long it takes you guys to go through medical school and everything. So thank you. I will appreciate, you know, everything that you do. So I think moving on, we're going to bring on Dr. Sani Aliyu, the coordinator of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 for Nigeria, to just interact with you and have a conversation around what you do. He's a specialist as well. So I think it would be a pretty engaging and interesting conversation for us to listen to. So we just plead that, you know, we understand the English is at least down to our level a little bit, you know. So Dr. Aliyu, I'm going to hand it over to you, and then you know, for you to have a conversation with Dr. Ogbuagu.
Thank you, Obina. Good evening. Thank you, Onyema. It's a pleasure to meet you. I think there's something about twins because I'm actually a twin as well. I have an identical twin brother who also did medicine and is currently in special about twins as well. He's a professor of public health and occupational medicine. So, Onyema, it's excellent work you've been doing. I think the Pfizer vaccine trumps it all at the moment, anyway. Apart from the issue of the nature of the storage, but in terms of efficacy and in terms of cost effectiveness as well, it's been a real crucial break. And to me, the COVID vaccine is really a triumph of science over disease, a triumph of science over the challenges that humanity will continue to face. The first question I have for you is the issue of fake news and the huge issue of vaccine. What would I call it? The lack of acceptance of vaccine, or the hesitancy in accepting vaccine. I was at a dinner recently, and I just sampled people around the table, and the majority, and these were all elites in Nigeria, the majority said no, they were not going to accept a vaccine. What do you think is the weakness in the ability of science to really put forward that information in terms of exactly how the mechanism is, and put out, get rid of those fears when it comes to the issue of messenger RNA vaccines or new methods of eliciting immune response in the body?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very great question. I think that the issue of vaccine hesitancy is not new. It's been an issue that's plagued us for a long time. In fact, I think the WHO at some point had listed vaccine hesitancy as one of the 10 greatest threats to global health. And I think if we just think about historically the role that vaccines have played with either eradicating diseases, near eradicating diseases, and even the year-to-year advantages, for example, here in the Western Hemisphere, getting a flu vaccine during the flu season. And I do know, for example, meningitis vaccines in Nigeria, yellow fever vaccines, and some of the very childhood immunizations, DPT, et cetera, that, have always been available. There've always been individuals that have been concerned about what vaccines are. There's a lot of misconceptions around the harms or the potential harms that vaccines cause. Their histories, either by clinical trials or past vaccination events that have occurred in unfortunate ways. And there's a history of that has also fueled people's suspicion about the intent of science when it comes to things like vaccination. And specifically for COVID-19 vaccines, I think that one of the concerns has certainly been about the accelerated process or timelines, the concerns about, especially in our part of the world, political influence on that process, and how that may or may not interfere with the ability to confidently state the safety and efficacy of vaccines. So I want to flag vaccine hesitancy as a serious threat for us. The punchline I would say is that, thinking about COVID-19, I think with vaccines, I think that would be the one public health approach that really holds the greatest promise. We can wear masks and social distance, but we know how difficult it is to maintain some of that for a long period of time. And those don't really get rid of the disease itself. I think that the vaccine would be that tool. That would be the final nail in the coffin, if you will, for COVID-19. So we have a solution to the problem. Let's not introduce problems to the solution. So, vaccine hesitancy is heterogeneous. There's no one reason why people don't want to take vaccines. Some are a little more easier to understand than others. But again, I just want to say that, I'm on WhatsApp and other networking platforms, and there's just a lot of misinformation there. And lastly, I'll just say, you asked how can we better communicate science to individuals? I think fora like this are critically important. Some studies in the US have shown that when you have scientists discussing things, not politicians, presenting data on science. So if you have trusted members of the scientific community, doctors, public health leaders being the messengers for things like vaccines, we're more likely to be successful. We're less likely to inject politics or other cultural issues that can cloud people's perception of the message we're carrying. So it's a big problem, and unfortunately, if not enough people take vaccine, we're not going to achieve herd immunity. Herd immunity is when you have a sufficient number of people in the community who have immunity against the disease that can at least lead to halting the pandemic. So it is a threat and a concern.
Well, thank you, Onyema. That's really quite revealing. The other issue that I wanted you to tackle really is the way science really communicates with the general public. So if I was to ask you a simple question, how would you describe your study in simple lay terms, especially dealing with issues such as the heterogeneity of the
Okay, I think we lost him. You can hear me, right? I can answer the part that I heard.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so how I'll describe the vaccine. So first of all, I just want to remind everyone that the reason why it was really, we're able to proceed this fast with the vaccine studies is because a lot of work had been done even prior to the COVID pandemic. So there have been a lot of work with vaccines for other conditions, other viral conditions, and trying different strategies, including mRNA technology as an option for vaccine development. So mRNA vaccine technology did not start with COVID. It predates COVID. There's data, there's animal studies in animals, there's early phase human studies assessing messenger RNA vaccine. So it wasn't relatively new. The other important part of a vaccine is when you create a vaccine, what you're trying to do is have individuals develop immunity to a vaccine antigen or a virus. And the point there is that because we knew the life cycle or how the virus causes an infection, you want to ask yourself, how can we abort that? How can we terminate the infection that the virus causes so that the target of the virus, the part of the virus that you need to inactivate or block, was well known from prior epidemics. For example, the SARS pandemic, which is also a coronavirus. There's also the MERS pandemic, which was another coronavirus. So because we knew the structure of the virus, we know how it causes infection, it was pretty clear what part of the virus to target to halt its ability to start an infection. So I gotta tell you this, every vaccine strategy, or majority of the vaccine strategies, I should say, are all targeting the same target, which is the spike protein of the virus. The spike protein of the virus is what it uses to initiate infection. So all of us are doing is trying different ways to have the body produce immunity against that. Some people are using, inactivated virus. Some people are using viral vectors. And our platform was to use messenger RNA technology. So again, the point is that we just want to develop vaccines that make the human body produce antibodies or proteins that block the virus from initiating and establishing an infection.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Onyema. Another question that keeps on coming up, which I think to the general public, I think it's extremely important, is when you talk about messenger RNA, you talk about integration, you talk about possibly altering DNA function, etc. Are we all going to turn into corona when we get these injections? Is there a risk that we could all become viruses? What's the fear?
Okay, so let me just be clear on this, because I know this is one of the concerns, and I think many of us have watched, videos of so-called experts, spewing out misinformation about, gene editing and, the vaccine being integrated into the host chromosome. Okay, so again, not to be too technical here, but our genes are really the DNA that sits in the side of our cells, in the inside of our cells. Now, the usual pathway is DNA can be changed to RNA, and RNA makes the proteins in our body, okay? But for the messenger RNA vaccines, okay, the way they work is that the messenger RNA vaccines, when they're introduced into the human body, the body reads them off and produces whatever the mRNA encodes, which could be a protein in this case. Messenger RNA is not reverse transcribed into DNA. It's not DNA. It doesn't incorporate into the human genome. In fact, messenger RNA is so fragile, in a couple of hours after getting the vaccine, it's disintegrated pretty quickly. over time, so that the vaccine, maybe even in under a day, has really left your body, but enough to be able to cause your body to produce proteins that stimulate the immune system against the viral structure, which is the spike protein. So I want to be very clear on this. Messenger RNA vaccines do not enter the nucleus. They don't incorporate into host DNA. And so there should be no concerns about it altering human genomes. That said, there are vaccines for other things that are DNA vaccines. And I know that there's at least one group that's looking at the DNA vaccine for coronavirus. So it's not even, it's a recognized way of developing vaccines. But I want to be clear that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, messenger RNA vaccines, do not get integrated in the host genome, and there are no concerns about that.
And indeed, for those of us who know the mechanism of action of HIV, you can say clearly that the way HIV acts is very similar to the adenovirus DNA vector that we talk about, but it's very different to having mRNA. So really, we're not going to turn into zombies, ladies and gentlemen, if we get this vaccine. So one last question, and then I will hand over back to Obina. I'm not sure how much time I have, but Obina, do I have any more time left? Because there's a very important question I wanted to ask Onyema, and really this has to do with the issue of vaccine storage and the logistics and the stability of the vaccine. From a government perspective, we're very concerned about our ability to maintain temperatures of -70, -80, especially in the rural areas, etc., when we are going to when we start using this vaccine.
Okay, I'm happy to take the question. I think I know the direction where he's going till he comes back. So Dr. Aliyu is alluding to something really important, which is the property of vaccines. And he's alluding to what we call the cold.
Throwing our money away by getting this sort of vaccine.
Yeah. So I got your question, Dr. Aliyu. You were out for a little bit, but it's okay. So you were talking about what we call the cold chain, which is all about, you know, how from you getting vaccine from a manufacturer, preserving it at optimal conditions or standards up to the point where it's delivered to the end user or vaccinee or vaccine recipient. And one of the issues with the messenger RNA vaccine is just because of the nature of the structure of the proteins involved and the other components of the vaccine, it needs to be stored at sub-zero temperatures. So the Pfizer vaccine has to be stored at anything from -60 to -80 degrees Celsius, which is, this is not your freezer temperature. This is much more ultra cold, very, very cold conditions. But that's the way that to preserve it. And so once you thaw the vaccine, it can last at the fridge temperature and reconstitute it, last in fridge temperature for about 5 days, okay? And certainly you want to, once you defreeze it, you want to use it within a very short period and administer it to people. So there are ways in the middle of the cold chain where you don't necessarily need those ultra cold temperatures, but you're right. The requirement for ultra cold temperatures would impact, settings such as low resource settings where we don't necessarily have that capacity. Pfizer has been innovative. They've created transport boxes, which can contain up to 1,000 vials of virus packaged with dry ice, which can preserve the vaccine for a couple of weeks, which can then be a transport medium that airplanes and airlines or other means of transportation can carry. And then obviously you need local protocols at sites where injections are happening. So for example, at hospital settings or hospitals wherever vaccines will be administered. Now that said, there's ways to tweak the mRNA vaccines to make them tolerate higher temperatures. You do know the Moderna vaccine can be put at a little warmer temperature than the Pfizer vaccine, but there are ways to what we call lyophilize or dry out or freeze dry the vaccine so that way it may not need to be stored under the same stringent conditions, but that's still in the works. We don't have a lyophilized version. And of course, it's something that Pfizer is thinking about regarding these conditions. So what I would say is that there have been some hiccups with other vaccines. We heard, for example, that the Sanofi vaccine had an issue with dosing. So that, when we're thinking about the next wave of vaccines that will be approved or available for COVID-19, it may be still a couple of months ahead. And so making the best use of what we have, planning for it, thinking about logistic distribution networks. So I'm pretty sure that, in Nigeria, that you have, people who are really thinking about these storage conditions. The last thing I'll say is I know that the WHO has a COVAX initiative, which Nigeria should have signed up for, which is a centralized, but global initiative to assure equitable distribution of vaccines. The goal is to be able to provide at least 20% of the population in every country that signs up with vaccines as they come along. And I'm sure that initiative will include planning for the storage conditions. So it's an issue, but it is surmountable.
I need Obina to come in here and take over, but there are loads of interesting questions, as you can see in the comment box, some having to do with the length of immunity, which is something that I'm very interested in, because we know from emergent science that those infected with COVID are still able to have a second infection. So really, what's the length, or what's the duration of the antibody response? Do we need to have this vaccine every year, as expensive as they are, etc.? But let me hand back to Obina, because I'm not sure how much time I'm supposed to have. I don't want to dominate the whole discussion. We've got a lot of other colleagues on the panel as well. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Aliyu. Yes, we do. You do have some more time, but I think we'll just go over to Professor Jalyesimi and then maybe come back to you for some more questions. So, Professor Jalyesimi, glad to have you here. So we'll just hand you off to ask some questions of Dr. Ogbuagu as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Also to say thank you to Honorable Abike Dabiri, to Dr. Sani Aliyu for the good work he's done with the task force. And to you, Onyema, all I can say is we are proud of you for the good work you've done. I think one of the problems we do have at times is we tend as scientists to concentrate on quantitative analysis and quantitative studies. And the lay public find it difficult to understand what we're trying to convey to them. We do that because at times we don't use qualitative studies or qualitative analysis to try and break these things down to the lay person. What are your views? I give an example of onchocerciasis, where it's a worm that causes river blindness. You cannot see it, and you present a poster to the locals showing a big worm, a huge worm, entering the leg in a river. People in that community will not believe you because they've never seen such a thing like that. I think it's similar with the same with vaccine and the virus. How can we use qualitative analysis or qualitative studies to try and get this message across to people that they are not going to, their DNA is not going to be changed, they're not going to be changed into zombies? And another thing, a second question, you hear the word post-shutdown being used for the vaccine. And I think when the lay public hear that, it's almost as if I get the vaccine, my body's going to shut down. How do you address that, or how do you change that narrative?
Okay, so you raise just so many good points that it'll be hard to give you an exhaustive answer. But let me try to address some of the key points you've made, and just the importance of qualitative studies. I think it's something that in the clinical research community, we know and appreciate. I'll give you an example with HIV prevention. So, an HIV prevention study that was done in sub-Saharan Africa offered women a modality to have to prevent them from acquiring HIV. Okay, so on the scientific side of things, it was, half people use this, half don't use that, and then let's see what the outcome was. But guess what? The intervention was supposed to be effective, but they ended up not showing any benefit for women because women said, you know what, I can't use this because my partner will think I'm an at-risk woman, or I have HIV, or I'm at risk for that. So because there wasn't a lot of effort to understand the social, cultural, relationship dynamics context of the use of biomedical intervention, the study flopped. You know, you had something that worked, but women didn't use it because of all these reasons. So I think we've always recognized that beyond the science of research, that we also need to understand the context of research and the context of the individuals who would either participate in the study or benefit from the study. So that's important. Now, when it comes to vaccines, I think that you know, some of those approaches are already being done. So, for example, there are a couple of my colleagues at Yale who have done surveys of people, for example. That's how we've come up with the vaccine hesitancy rates, right? That's how we can tell you that in the United States, less than half of people would be willing to accept the COVID-19 vaccine. That's when we know that when you segregate that data by race, that we know that Blacks and Hispanics, for example, are even less likely. I think for Blacks, it was about 25% who said they're willing to take a vaccine, and maybe 40% for Hispanics, something of that order. So in other words, these studies are important so that even now that the vaccines have shown efficacy, we are trying to understand how people perceive this and their approach to it. And there's also another survey that actually asked, how best do we message about, how best does the scientific community message about vaccines? And a US audience said that they wanted trusted messengers, so they want doctors to be conveying the information, not politicians, okay, which I think was interesting. They complained about the partisanship, so we have Democrats and Republicans, that if there was a consensus presentation on scientific progress, they would accept. So they didn't like the political bickering behind all of this. So some of these studies are critically important beyond the science of vaccines to engage people in the community, to understand, how they perceive things, and even learn from them the ways to which you should communicate and message that. And I think many times, just a simple reason could also be that, not all scientists are great communicators, and sometimes we use a language level. We need to think about the literacy rates of the people we're interacting with, and recognize that we have to use language and terms that are culturally, sensitive when we are communicating some of these information. So, it doesn't do justice to all your questions, but I think that you do highlight a very important aspect of research that we should definitely involve people more. We do have a program at Yale where we call it the Cultural Ambassadors Program, which is where we engage, for example, pastors of churches, because we recognize that those are the people who have the currency of trust in their communities. We engage leaders of community-based organizations that support services to minority communities, etc. We've learned that sometimes hearing from me is not good enough, but hearing from those community individuals. So I'm sure in Nigeria, we have trusted people within our communities and in our settings who are better messengers than us, scientists, researcher, doctor people, that will probably be more effective in communicating that. And it's critical to the success, especially of a public health intervention. The vaccine can be 95% effective, but the real world effectiveness can be 10% because nobody uses it and nobody trusts it. So to bridge that gap between efficacy of the vaccine and real world effectiveness, Prof. Rotimi, many of the things you're mentioning are critically important.
Yeah, thank you for that lucid answer. I know you probably studied about, well, over 40,000 people when you were undertaking this study. And we do know that there's some racial differences in terms of severity and outcomes with COVID-19. We're also aware that when it comes to research, people of color tend not to step forward. And when you look at genomics, we all handle drugs differently. Is there any difference when it comes to genomics? Or looking at your study, did you have quite a lot of people of color in the study? Did you look at their response as against the response of Caucasians?
So that's a great question. And the question is really about potential racial differences in responses to vaccines. From the scientific standpoint, I think we do not anticipate that there will be any differences by race in the way people handle messenger RNA. But in spite of that, we definitely focused in the clinical trials on ensuring that there was a robust representation of every racial ethnic group in the study. For those of you who were following the early recruitment, halfway through the recruitment for the messenger RNA vaccines, alarm was raised that there were insufficient numbers of racial and ethnic minorities included. And so, the programs responded by including sites where there was a lot of diversity in the community, so that, research sites that have access to communities that are diverse, and then focused efforts to try and attract and recruit ethnic racial minorities in the study. I mentioned the program we have at Yale, which is a cultural ambassadors program. That's one of the ways we using these trusted messengers from the community, cultural leaders, recognized leaders within the communities to help us be messengers. Many of them participated in the research and then went back to their churches, their communities, their organizations, their friends, their family, to be that almost peer recruitment approach for studies. So that's great. Now, to the specifics of the study. So yes, there were almost 44,000 people enrolled in the study. The racial ethnic demographics are as follows. So Blacks, African Americans were about 9% of the study. Latino individuals or Latinx individuals were about 26%. And Asians were about 4.5%. One thing I will say is that even in the US, that racial ethnic minorities are differentially impacted by COVID. They get hospitalized more, they die more. Some of it is really not driven by genetics. It's driven by the fact that there are higher rates of comorbidities, medical conditions, underlying medical conditions that are associated with worse outcomes. Many of the racial ethnic minorities engage in what we call, who are essential workers. So, grocery workers, for example, or supermarket store workers, postal workers. So they had to work during the pandemic. So if there's a lockdown, everyone else stays home, but essential workers go to work, and by virtue of that, they're at risk for COVID. And of course, some of the structural inequities in care that people of color get compared to their Caucasian counterparts. So all those confluence of factors led to Blacks and Hispanics being a higher risk for worse COVID outcomes. But here's my point. Whenever we conduct a clinical trial, we want participants in the clinical trial to reflect the demographics of the community, okay? But even more, reflect the demographics of people who are suffering the disease. Because when you get the results of a clinical trial, the next question is the population you studied in the clinical trial reflective of either my patients, my community, people like me? And so that's what the term is generalizability of the findings. And so, we're happy with the number of racial ethnic minorities that were involved in the Pfizer study. And when we looked at the study results, comparing whites to Blacks, we found that the efficacy remained the same regardless of race. So we can confidently say that our study found that by race and ethnicity. That said, remember that we recruited a couple of racial minorities in the later part of the study, so we may not have had as much duration of follow-up in some of the minority populations as we did for the Caucasian and white population. So as we continue to run the study, hopefully we'll continue to generate more data and look to see. But I think for now, the early signals are that race and ethnicity did not influence or affect the response to the vaccine, and robust efficacy, 94-95%.
Yeah, thank you for that reassurance. Obin, do you want me to continue or?
Let's just move on to Honorable Abike right now for some more questions from her. Then.
No questions for me, but so many questions from the chat group. Many people asking, and I'm sure you can't finish all those questions. Let me look at some that I believe that needs to be answered. Some are saying the vaccine seems fast-tracked. It looks like it was done in a hurry. And what's the reassurance? And then they want to know Will it change people's DNA? And I think Dr. Aliyu asked that. Is it going to change your DNA if you take the vaccine? And then some are also asking, why Pfizer vaccine compared to others? Is it better than others? Why is it the first? So, and they also worry about the quality of the vaccine. Now, if this vaccine comes to Nigeria, they're asking who is going to ensure quality control? And I think Dr. Aliyu, if he's still there, can also answer that. How do we ensure quality control? Then another question that I think you need to answer, you talk about the storage capacity has to be at a certain temperature. In a country where there's no constant electricity supply, what are the dangers and challenges, and what can be done about that? And then somebody just sent a funny one to my phone and says, no vaccine for me because my religion says don't take any vaccine. And then finally, if you have the disease before, if you had COVID, must you still take the vaccine? Even if you had COVID and you have been cured? Those are the burning issues now. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you, Honorable Abike. You asked, I think, 6 or so questions, and I will try to do justice to them. And I think maybe even allow Dr. Aliyu answer maybe the specific questions around cold chain planning in Nigeria. Maybe he'll be able to add some value to that. So prior to COVID-19, the fastest, quickest start to finish for a vaccine was about 4 years for the mumps vaccine. Okay, but you can imagine for the COVID-19 vaccine, it's really about 9 months, right? Because everything started right about March-ish, okay, at least when the first clinical trials started. Now, yes, the studies have been accelerated, which is appropriate because of the times we're in, the fact that this was a global pandemic with a decent, quite significant mortality rate, and everybody worked together. The reason why the vaccine trials have gone on so successfully, and I think it's just an amazing experience. It's just a tribute to how when everybody works together with laser focus on a common goal to achieve a common goal, address current public health threats, this is what success looks like. So let me give you the story. So it was literally 2 days after China had released the sequence of the virus that mRNA was already constructed. BioNTech was the company in Germany that constructed the mRNA vaccine. Okay, quickly they worked with Pfizer to support advancement of the vaccine, and thereafter engaging researchers and communities like myself, the different research sites to conduct these clinical trials. And so working together, I like to call it teamwork, but many of us are not on the same team. You know that sometimes there's an adversarial relationship between us, academic institutions and big pharma, for example, and big pharma doesn't always collaborate on things between themselves. Then there's public health officials, government that provided the resources. So this is what public health success looks like when everybody works together: biopharmaceutical, pharmaceutical company, public health officials, research institutions, and researchers coming together is what happens. So rather than make it a bad thing and try to label it as a rushed thing, I think this is really a tribute to how well things can work or how quickly things can be achieved when we work together. Even though the studies went on fast, there were no shortcuts. The studies went through all the phases. Phase 1 studies where they assessed for safety of the vaccine, that was done in very few individuals. For Pfizer, it was about 60 individuals or so who were given the vaccine first. Safety was monitored. When we found that it was safe, then you progressed to the next phase of the study where you gave people the vaccine and you measured immune responses and answered the question, does the vaccine generate the immune response needed to protect against COVID? And then after that, that's when you did the large phase 3 clinical trials to look at the efficacy of the vaccine to protect against COVID, but also did additional safety assessments. Between the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, and I say this repeatedly, that there's at least 75 or 76,000 people who've already received a COVID mRNA vaccine. So when people are asking, I want others to get it, I want someone to get it ahead of me, 76,000 people have already received it, okay? Now, I agree that we don't have, 2-year safety data or something longer, but based on the technology, we at least have, 2 months of safety data after the vaccine. And like I told you, the vaccine antigen, the mRNA disintegrates in the body in hours, literally, after you get the vaccine. So we do not anticipate any long-term side effects that have not been detected very early on. But that said, those studies are ongoing. So we're pretty confident about the safety record of the vaccine. Now, the second thing, and I'll say this again, messenger RNA vaccines do not alter DNA. In fact, I think I said this as a joke to another Nigerian group I spoke to, that if you turn on a video or you're listening to an expert, the moment you hear them say this alters DNA, label them a conspiracy theorist, because it's not true. So I want to make it very clear. The messenger RNA, to change RNA to DNA, you need to reverse transcribe it. You literally need to do what HIV does. And there's nothing like reverse transcriptase property in the vaccines. I just want to be really clear about that. It does not alter DNA. It doesn't make you a zombie. It doesn't alter your genetic makeup. Okay, and we don't expect any interference with that. So just again, to be very clear about that. The quality of the vaccine, again, so whenever, that's one thing that regulators look at, for example, the US FDA, and also Pfizer tries to do what we call lot consistency, which means that you want to make sure that each batch of vaccine, is, of good quality and good standards. So when we know that regulators, look at efficacy and safety, for example, like the FDA, they also track, manufacturing controls. They have chemists, they have people like that who look into to make sure that the vaccines are of appropriate quality. So there are checks and balances to make sure that occurs. Now, I do recognize, again, someone asked what's the capacity of either Nigeria or Africa to be able to confirm the quality of vaccines. We know that capacity is lacking. I know this very well because I actually sit as a chair of the Infection Prevention and Logistics subgroup of the African Task Force for Coronavirus Response. I sit in those CDC meetings. So I do know that we're still building up our capacity to do regulatory activities. And there's a lot of work going on regulatory harmonization and across the continent. So, those capacities are still in their infancy, but, there's still a lot of work to be done in that regard. But that said, the COVAX initiative, I hope, will serve as that central clearinghouse. And then, but it's really up to us when we receive the vaccine at our own sites to do quality assurance. And I'll leave the rest of that for Dr. Aliyu to talk about. But before I do that, the last thing I just want to say is if someone asks me why Pfizer, or in fact, let me be broad because it's not just Pfizer. The Moderna study is a messenger RNA. Now, just to say this, the fact that Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, the same technology, both messenger RNA vaccines, the fact that those studies were conducted differently, but using the same technology, and that the results literally mirror one another. Moderna did their own study. They found that an mRNA vaccine was 94% effective. Pfizer did their own entirely different, 95% effective. So it's almost that each study validates the other because it's the same technology, and they studied two different large-scale phase 3 trials, and they've both shown efficacy. Now, we've seen that the AstraZeneca, which is a viral vector, reported about 70% efficacy, in fact, as low as 62% in one of the trials. And we've heard that other studies have had difficulties with even achieving sufficient immune responses. So I think that based on the efficacy results of the mRNA vaccine studies, is going to be very hard do better than 95%, frankly. So it'll be interesting to see where others fall in between the efficacy. The other thing is that messenger RNA vaccines are very easy to mass produce. And so we know that there's a global demand for vaccines. And if we have vaccine technologies, not like the inactivated forms or viral vector forms that need quite a bit of time to develop, messenger RNA vaccines are developed very rapidly and can be rapidly scaled up to meet the global demand. So those would be some of the advantages that the messenger RNA vaccines have against other types. And I turn over to you, Dr. Aliyu, to address, quality control and planning around vaccine distribution, and so that people in Nigeria, Dr. Aliyu, want to know if the Pfizer vaccine gets to me, to my village, will it be the same quality that it is in the study?
And also the power issue, Dr. Aliyu, the fact that there's no constant electricity supply.
So,
what effect will that have?
Yes, so thank you. So I do have a lot of questions for Onyema, but I'll try and address the the Nigeria side in terms of the preparation for the vaccine. So as you're aware, it's the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency are responsible for the delivery of vaccines, and they have been working with Gavi as well as with UNICEF for many years. Some of us would remember about 15, 20 years ago, there were issues with private contractors bringing in vaccines and leaving them at the airport, etc. And all this changed when the method of procuring vaccines by government moved over to UNICEF and to a more defined system. Specifically for COVID, there's a lot of work that's currently ongoing at the government side. The minister has set up an expert advisory group, and even within the PTF itself, as we transition next year, the plan is that a smaller body that will be formed would have a specific remit at the highest level of making sure that funds are identified and the vaccines are brought in. We know exactly how much is required to vaccinate 44 million Nigerians as the first phase of the response. These will mostly be healthcare workers and elderly people and those with comorbidities. In terms of your question about cold chain, yes, it's going to be a huge challenge. The current vaccines that we have, childhood vaccines, are mostly maintained between -2, -3. NCDC are the only government institution I know that have refrigerators for -70, -80. And if you ask their DG, they have electricity all around 24 hours, both solar as well as generators and NEPA. But it's a huge challenge. It's costing them a huge amount of money just to maintain and the samples that they have at -70, -80 over the last 1-2 years. In fact, the investment itself for the refrigerators was quite a lot. It came from a Global Fund grant that was provided for our HIV survey about 2.5 years ago. So a lot of work going on. I certainly would expect that primary healthcare, together with the Federal Ministry of Health, will be up to the game, and they should be able to provide vaccines that are maintained within the temperature required, the ultra cold temperature. There are a number of companies as well that are very good at maintaining cold chain equipment and doing the logistics, and I'm sure there will be some competition involved next year when the process starts fully. We hope that the vaccines will be available in Nigeria commitment from the federal government. The money itself, if you look at what the federal government has in terms of its budget, it's actually not a huge amount. It's probably a case of canceling a few roads, and we'll probably have the money for that. But it needs to be budgeted. We have already approached the legislatures because the 2021 budget is yet to be signed, and primary health full estimate of what will be required. So that's the preparation from the government side. I think this is a fascinating discussion. I have a number of questions, Abike, if you can allow me to ask Onyema, because we really don't want him to go away without answering these questions. First of all, full disclosure, I am not a vaccine pessimist. If the Pfizer vaccine is available today, I will take it. If my children are allowed to take it, I will ask them to take it. Simply because if you look at our data in Nigeria, between the ages of 50 to 60, 23% of those who caught COVID died. Those between the ages of 60 to 70, 28% died. If I catch COVID today in Nigeria, I have a barely 3 in 4 chance of survival. I have a 1 in 4 chance of dying. That's huge. The mortality is huge. So when people tell me that COVID has not been so deadly in Nigeria, I would say yes, for young people. But if you are middle-aged like me or elderly like me, then I'm afraid if you catch COVID, you're really playing Russian roulette with your life. So anything that will protect me, I'll take it, especially something that has a 95% efficacy. There's no drug on earth that doesn't have a side effect. Just look at it. Just do the SPC. Take a drug, paracetamol, summary products characteristics. Do a Google search. There will be side effects. So the question is, what's the risk-benefit ratio? What's the risk-benefit analysis? Is it worth it? So I have a number of questions. I'm now
Okay, I think it's frozen for a minute. We'll just give him a minute.
Vaccination. Why is it that people with natural infections are actually picking up, even though it's a very small percentage, and then those with vaccination are presumed to not?
Dr. Ali, we lost you for a minute, so if you can repeat the question again.
So, sorry, my internet is a bit. So the first question is, how long does the immunity last?
Okay. So
okay.
Okay.
What's the difference between natural infection and versus vaccine-related infection? Why is it that people with natural infection are still getting infected, even though a small proportion? Why do we assume that suddenly vaccines will be more effective? We know if you catch measles, it's more you're more likely to be immune from it, even though the measles vaccine is very effective. So, what side effects are you bothered about, Onyema? If I was to ask you, if I was to put you in front of a judge and say, give me 5 side effects, what would you say? So how long did you follow up the cases, those receiving the vaccine, and are you having any secondary analysis? If you follow them up for just a few months, have you looked at it again in terms of 6 months, a year? Maybe more people have caught COVID in the last 6 months after having the vaccine. For instance, is it really worth it for Nigeria to put a large chunk of money towards a vaccine that may have a very short-term effect? And then when are you publishing the study? We know that this is emergency use authorization. So when is it going into the Lancet or the New England Journal or Science or whatever, so that we can know that real scientists, in addition to the FDA, etc., have also looked at it? And then why is it, maybe you may not know the answer to this, but why is Gavi asking that indemnity should be from the government side? So for instance, the Nigerian government, why not from the pharmaceuticals themselves? What are they worried about? Are they worried about another issue with I won't mention the drug, but you know what I'm talking about in terms of congenital malformations, etc. And then finally, a personal question. Onyema, have you taken the vaccine? And if you have, should we expect you to become a zombie very soon?
Thank you, Dr. Aliyu. I think the theme to your questions is becoming a zombie. But I think that may end up having a positive effect, because maybe that's the best way to debunk that myth about the genetic code and genetic gene-based vaccines. So great questions, and I tried to write them down, and I'll try to go through them. So you asked about what's the durability of immunity. That's a very important question. So it's, in simple terms, is how long does the immunity from the vaccine last? So are you going to be protected a few months, as against a few years, or even maybe a couple of years? We don't have the answer to that. So there's 2 ways now to develop immunity to the virus. One is through getting the infection yourself, which is the so-called natural immunity, and then another type of immunity, which is vaccine-induced immunity, which is what we're talking about. So first of all, for natural immunity, or immunity that follows infection, it was disheartening to see the trajectories or the trends of people's antibodies over time, especially those who had mild disease. In a month to 2 months after recovering from mild disease, a lot of people have lost their antibodies already. Now, that said, in the infectious disease world, levels of antibody don't always correlate to protection against a disease, but we have evidence, based on some of the cases of reinfection of people getting SARS-CoV-2 a second time, is that a couple of months after an infection, that some individuals could actually get reinfected. So I think that there's not a lot of hope that natural immunity would be the way to go to protect individuals against an infection. And of course, many people would die on the way to developing natural immunity. Like you rightly said, elderly tend to have higher mortality rates. Now, what I can tell you is that for the vaccines, as far out as I think 57 days or so, about 8 weeks from the vaccine, we see that the antibody levels remain above the threshold we think that should confer protection against the virus. The studies plan to go on for 2 years. So we're doing blood draws from individuals over a 2-year period to keep measuring those antibody levels. Most of us expect that the vaccine-induced immunity will last longer than natural immunity, but I can't answer today, currently, how long it's going to last, because we just don't have that data. Remember that even those who started the first phase clinical trials have only been on it for maybe about 9 months or so, the first individuals. So stay tuned. I think we'll learn so much more about the durability, how long the antibody responses last. But I think most of us think, given just how poorly natural immunity is performing, that the vaccine would do a better job with keeping people protected longer against getting infection. Someone asked about survivors of COVID. Again, we did have about 3% of people in the study had COVID in the past. Now, we tried to exclude people who had active COVID at the time they came in, or people who had known diagnosis of COVID before they came in. But there are people who had asymptomatic infection that we did not detect, but we knew that they had asymptomatic infection because in their blood they had antibodies to the virus. Those people had the same amount of protection against infection or reinfection as those who never had it, being protected against infection. So the efficacy was similar for those who had asymptomatic infection coming to the study and those who were, and those who did not have any prior history of infection. So we feel pretty confident that there could be some protective effect for people who could have had SARS in the past, and to answer that question. Now, as it comes to side effects, Dr. Aliyu, I think you said it very elegantly, that even if you drink a lot of water, you can die from it, right? So there's nothing like an inert substance. There's nothing that doesn't have any side effects. Sometimes I don't like the word side effects because it tends to, give it an entirely negative connotation. But, every vaccine, every drug does have side effects. The question will be, the risks of using it greater than the benefits, or the benefits greater than the risk. You're talking about the risk-benefit ratio. So one of the big assessments with the Pfizer vaccine was safety analysis. And the good news is that there were no serious adverse events, okay, that led to loss of life or anything with the vaccine, which is a big deal because, like I said, the 44,000 people took the vaccine and we didn't detect any of those really serious adverse events that would have caused us to halt the study, like has happened in other studies, right? I mean, we saw that the AstraZeneca vaccine was held for a while because there were, at different times, different side effects. Same thing with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. In our study, we didn't have a reason to stop the study because we did not identify any serious safety issue. Now, I know many of you may have heard about the UK cases where there were 2 individuals who had anaphylaxis. Now, these were 2 individuals who had a history of anaphylaxis to other things. And when they got the vaccine, they also had a severe allergic reaction. These individuals carried what we call EpiPens, or these are rescue medications that they carry around so that if they have a severe allergy, they can inject it to preserve from having any adverse events occurring. So those events are rare, and we have included in both the clinical trial, even before this, and also with the emergency use authorization that it has received, that people with a history of severe allergy. Now, I'm not talking about I have a rash when I drink Tylenol, or I have this. We're not talking about the mild allergies. These are people who had the much more serious type, the serious version of allergies, which was anaphylaxis, which is a big deal. So that's the minority of people who have the severe allergies. And I think even in one of the cases I hear, we're not even entirely sure it was the vaccine because the individual took other things that they are known to be allergic to. So we'll learn a little bit more about that. So again, when it comes to serious reactions, we had no concerns. Now, that said, the reactions I would encourage everyone to reasonably expect would be any vaccination you get, you can have some discomfort at the site of injection. Most people that got the injection felt a little bit of discomfort. It's at par with any other vaccine you get, that you can feel a heaviness in your hand. Some people get systemic symptoms, which is a little bit of a fever, muscle aches, fatigue, headache. The 2 commonest systemic side effects we saw were headache and fatigue, or feeling tired. Those tend to be mostly mild to moderate, very, very mild. They don't make you miss work. They don't send you to be hospitalized. They're just mild. You can tolerate them many times without needing any medications, or you can decide to take paracetamol, right? That's what we take in Nigeria if you have a temperature, and it's at par with other vaccines that you get. So the side effect profile was reassuring, and we actually found that older people, so people age 56 and older, I don't know why 56 is older, but that's how we did it, but 56 and older had less side effects than those who were younger, okay? Now, the other thing too is, one of the reasons that you have the so-called side effects after getting the vaccine is because that's your body responding to the vaccine. That's your body generating an immune response. And we know this because we found more of those reactions after the second vaccination, and it times and correlates and coincides beautifully with antibody levels going up, which is exactly what you want. So I know in Nigeria we say no pain, no gain kind of thing, but what I'm just trying to say is that sometimes some of these symptoms are actually a good sign, because they're a sign that your body has recognized the vaccine and is developing the antibodies that you need to protect you. In fact, in the clinical trial, because we gave half people placebo or a saline shot and half a vaccine, people were trying to figure out if they got the real vaccine, depending on how they felt after the vaccine. So people who had fever says, I know you didn't tell me, but I think I got the vaccine because I had a fever. So in other words, I just want to say it can be mild symptoms and well tolerated. Would I get the vaccine, Dr. Aliyu? Absolutely. I think for now, it will either be Monday or Tuesday. I want to be the first person in my hospital to take it. I'm going to video it, and I told people I'm going to put it on my Twitter feed. So stay tuned and send me feedback as if I looked scared when the needle was going in. When you study a vaccine, because of conflicts of interest, you cannot participate in the study. You can't participate in the study that you are conducting. So I was limited by that. Take it. You will see my video, and I'll be first in line. And I'm actually excited. I just did 2 weeks on the COVID wards, ending 2 weeks ago. So I cared for COVID patients, both those that died and those who were sick during my clinical work time. And I can't wait to take a vaccine. And it will just, the amount of reassurance it will give me, that I can be safe. Because, sometimes you're very tired of wearing, for the doctors on the call, right? You're very tired of wearing that mask. It's very hot and uncomfortable. I've had ulcers in my ear because of the string from the face mask. You forget to ask a patient something, you want to go back, you're like, I have to dress up again. It's very fatiguing. And of course, we're all limited in where we can go, not congregate. So, I think getting a vaccine would be a game changer. It wouldn't make me become careless, but at least it would give me some reassurance that I have some degree of protection against the disease. I think, and it has been published in the New England Journal of Medicine on December 10th, so you can look it up. Oh, sorry, one more question, indemnity. So what indemnity means is if there are harms that occur to individuals with receiving a new vaccine, especially a new vaccine, who bears the responsibility for the costs or charges? That's a little bit above my pay grade, but I will tell you, at least give an example of what's being done here. I think that, here in the US, that part of the emergency use authorization was, having, being able to channel a system in place where individuals who maybe do suffer a side effect from the vaccine can be compensated. So we have those kind of programs here. I think they're separate from the industry, but I'll leave it to you to answer more of that technical question, not my area or something I'm involved in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obina, if I can quickly come in here with some questions that has been sent to us by email. You've answered the issue of the side effects. People are very worried about that, but like you said, there will always be side effects. But can an asthmatic patient, a diabetic patient, or a pregnant woman take this vaccine, or will it affect fertility? That is one question. And then why are airlines insisting that you must get the vaccine before you board? This is giving rise to some conspiracy theories. And why should you insist that you must have a COVID vaccine before you catch a flight? That's another one. And then, has there been any clinical trials that can maybe let us know what the effects can be 5 to 10 years from now? And then you talked a lot about this communication. People want to know, yes, there's a lot of miscommunication, but from the scientific point of view, what can be done to reduce or make people know the true information? You've said, yes, hear from the scientists, but they are saying even beyond that, what do you think should be done about miscommunication? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, just excellent questions. It almost makes me wish I had the, the whole day to talk, because these are very important concerns. And if we need to do this again or have another forum, I'm always willing to do part 2. I think I remember from my days in Nigeria that no movie ever has a part 1 alone. There's always part 2 and part 3. So I don't know if Nollywood or whatever we call it is still bustling, but that's what I remember from my days in Nigeria. That's if people stop selling the fake versions of the video. Anyway, so one of the important questions is subgroups, and I think this is really important, right? So who, which populations were included in the study, which were not included. We did not include pregnant women. We did not include breastfeeding women. So if a woman is pregnant or they're breastfeeding, we did not include them in the study. And the reason why is that we know that if the harms that come to a woman, it can occur to the kid, not because we're worried about the Pfizer vaccine. Every clinical trial I have ever done for HIV, whatever, the first wave of studies are usually not conducted in pregnant women. When we conduct them in non-pregnant individuals and we see that it's safe as has been done, then we have and now go ahead with studies in pregnant women. So those studies will commence. That said, people didn't listen to us, and there were 23 pregnancies as at the time we sent the information to the FDA. We had a couple of people who were pregnant just around before they received the vaccine. We have people who became pregnant on the vaccine in the immediate period, and we had some who had pregnancy a couple of weeks after the vaccine. So, obviously they're pregnant now, it's a 9-month process, so there will be data on that. Okay, but so far, nobody has, to the best of my knowledge, we're not aware of a pregnancy loss or anything. So I think that's very reassuring. And of course, as the vaccines get rolled out globally, there's always a pregnancy registry with drugs, which means that, if I'm a doctor and I give a vaccine and my patient tells me they're pregnant, you can actually log in that information. So we have systems like that, at least here in the Western countries. I don't know if we have similar structures like that in Nigeria, but that's one way we also capture, even at the community level, when the vaccine goes out, what happens with pregnancy. So we feel pretty confident that things are looking okay. One other way you can do this, which I think was suggested actually during the FDA meeting, was you can do studies in animals, and give them extremely high doses of the mRNA vaccine and look to see if there's any impact on pregnancy. Those studies were at least mentioned. I don't know quite yet if they'll be done. So, but based on the technology, we do not think that there should be any harms. But, again, we still need to learn more about that. So for now, pregnant women and breastfeeding women were not included in that. Yes, we did include people with comorbidities. About 8.4% of study participants had diabetes, 35% had obesity, okay, high basal metabolic index, and coupled with a lot more people had hypertension and some of the common comorbidities. We also had people with HIV enter into the study as well, although they had to be on antiretroviral therapy and have their disease controlled. So we do have data in some of these conditions, including asthma, underlying lung disease. They were all included in the study. So none of them are a contraindication. The only warning would be for immune-compromised patients. So people who are on cancer chemotherapy, people who are transplant recipients, which are not so rare, those kind of patients, it's not contraindicated for them, but they, you just have to be aware that they can have a diminished response to the vaccine. That's expected. Okay, so it's not that they shouldn't get it, but it just could be that the antibody levels may not be that sufficient. The studies are planned to be done for 2 years. Even after 2 years, there's mechanisms to collect data on vaccines, and I'm pretty sure with the rollout of the vaccines, we would continue to accrue more long-term data on that. It doesn't cause infertility. I think that's funny. So the mRNA vaccine encodes for the spike protein, okay? So I think that we can learn from even the coronavirus infection itself, because that has the whole virus, not just the spike protein using the vaccine. And I think that the data in pregnancy isn't that, harms in pregnancy, but we do not think that it causes infertility. I think that's one of those rumors that go around that need to be debunked. We do not expect that to be an issue. There's always been that concern with sterilization of, people groups with vaccines. I think that's a common rumor in Nigeria. that vaccines are to sterilize us, to limit population growth. There's some of those really wild, crazy conspiracy theories out there. That is not the case. Yeah, I think I answered most of your questions. And you mentioned communication, right? So on the scientific end, I think that some of the studies, like I mentioned, where you survey the public to understand their perceptions around things, how they prefer to learn about things, those are critically important to be done, but also to reassure the public that the studies that are being done are conducted with the highest quality. So in the medical world, we tend to place the greatest emphasis on randomized controlled trials, because what you do is you bring people together, you figure out how many people you need to study to show an effect that's appropriate, and then you give half of them an intervention and half of them randomly no intervention. Those are the best conditions to study the efficacy of a drug. And so what we can, from the scientific end, our responsibility, in fact, our ethical and moral and social responsibility is for us to design trials in a way that minimize harms, okay, and potentially can optimize benefits to individuals, but also to ensure that the quality of scientific work and research is at the highest standard possible. And I'd like to think that the Pfizer vaccine study met that very high standard so that the results can be believed. I'll stop here and happy to take more questions.
You didn't answer the one about airlines. Why should it be conformed to?
You guys want to get me in trouble. I have my own opinions. So okay. Listen, no. Let me just go around it peripherally. So what I will say is that we know that it makes sense for airlines to enforce mask wearing, right, to ensure that people wear masks, because there's worry that if you're in a clustered space, although some data suggests airlines, because of the pressure, are not necessarily a conducive environment for spreading the disease. But I think that now that we have another public health intervention that can confer protection both for the individual and collectively protection for the community, it does make sense, that being vaccinated against COVID should be a requirement. Is there a model for this? Absolutely. How many of you have yellow cards? Right? Don't many of us have yellow cards for yellow fever vaccination? Okay, those are important, and So I think that sometimes we tend to think of COVID differently and forget how we've managed other deadly infectious diseases. So again, now I'm not for and this could go either way. I think especially for a new vaccine, maybe mandating it is a step too far, which means forcing people to take it. That's a whole different conversation we can have. But I think that airlines requiring people to have vaccines, I would support that.
Okay. Cool. Thank you, Dr. Ogbuagu. Honorable Abike, we are done with the questions. Do you have?
Well, if we. I think we've done a.
Okay, we are breaking up a bit, so I'll just jump in with
our time schedule, except John's.
Right. So I'll just jump in with one or two more questions, and then we'll move on to a topic that Dr. Ogbuagu wants to actually emphasize. We talked about it, which is about driving vaccine adoption within our communities and what we as individuals that actually believe in it can do to communicate the benefits to other people in the community. But first, I want to just ask, some of this popped up in the chat as well. People are asking, like, why isn't there like an alternative? Like, why are we also looking at an African alternative? And why isn't there like a vaccine for like diseases that we as Africans have been dealing with, like malaria and all that? Why just jumping straight to a vaccine for COVID?
I'm seeing on the chat someone saying COVID is deadly, really, which I find fascinating. I think that if we look at the numbers of people who've died worldwide, right, what is it now, 15 million in the US, right, our numbers are almost going to hit 300,000. I know that even if the mortality rate is 5%, so as a statistic, as 2% or 5% or whatever it is in our countries, though that percent looks small, so that 95% or 98% recover. But just think about, in a short period of time, the toll that this pandemic has taken on individuals. Think about the lost productivity from those who get sick. Granted, I know that it's skewed towards the elderly, but think about the economic losses. You know, sometimes we medicalize it and just think about deaths there, but think about poverty. You know, if you look at some of the WHO predictions as to the costs of COVID-19, right? There'll be millions of unintended pregnancies, there's disruption to healthcare services for many medical conditions, including HIV care, TB care, you know, that are dropping off because of this. Their economic impacts, loss of jobs, loss of livelihoods, you know. So the COVID-19 pandemic is imposing a huge toll, mental health issues, you know. So I think that
you'll call me back.
Yeah, I think that we you know, one of the reasons why there's been a lot of laser focus on COVID-19 certainly is just because of the toll that it's taken on us, and I think that that's important, and that's why everyone's focused on that. Well, was there another question I missed?
Yes, likewise. Someone's asking about vaccine for some diseases like malaria. You know, kind of diseases that we're used to. Why don't they have vaccines for those, and then instead where everybody's focusing on COVID?
Okay, is it any secret that a lot of the research that's done on new diseases are done in parts of the world where there's investments, huge investments made in research and development and in science? So I think it's a rhetorical question that needs to, especially those who are policymakers in the audience, you know, how can we better position ourselves within the continent of Africa to address our own public health threats, to develop and support scientists, build scientific communities, build research infrastructure? It's not that we don't have the talent. We have the talent in our country, we have our talent in our continent. I am no different from any other person on this panel. I've just had the opportunities and maybe put in a little work to get it done, right? So, you know, there's so much talent in Nigeria, there's so much talent in Rwanda and Liberia, there's so much talent that we have. And I think the question goes back to all of us is, you know, how are we thinking of building an enabling environment to allow us, you know, from a scientific standpoint to address our own public health threats? So I send the question back to our thoughts. And I think that, you know, that remains something. You know, COVID-19 has unmasked deficiencies. Right? Even in the US, COVID-19 has reminded us how poorly we're doing with racial ethnic minorities. That's why they're dying more. It's unmasked that deficiency even in our own system. We've seen how health literacy matters, how politicizing public health responses can lead to deaths. There'll be less Americans dead if people wore masks and didn't congregate. But we've just been, our messaging has been all over the place. The same way, COVID-19 has unmasked deficiencies in Africa. You know, someone asked about regulatory capacity. If you get a vaccine, how would we know it's the right standard? What does that mean? Do we have that capacity in Africa to do that? So let's learn from the COVID-19 experience. Let's humbly recognize our deficiencies, and let's now use this opportunity to prepare for this pandemic better. But guess what? Another COVID-19 may not be too far away. You know, we all call this a pandemic of a lifetime, but we know that viruses have always come up. Ebola, you know, comes up once in a while. HIV is another zoonosis that came from non-human primates into the human population. There was SARS, then MERS, and now SARS-CoV-2 infection. So there's always the next biologic threat, global health threat. And so this is the time, as we view these deficiencies, to start to develop structures that would outlast this pandemic and will serve us well and keep us prepared for the future.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Thank you for that. So just want to go into what you talked about, that's of interest to you regarding how we can help move this information within our communities. So if you have something to share with us on that, on your ideas on how best we as individuals can also support the efforts to at least get our communities protected. And then after that, I'd like to also ask you and Professor Jalyesimi and Dr. Aliyu, talk a little bit about how the diaspora can get involved in some of these deficiencies that you just mentioned. I think your last answer showcased a lot of the issues that would, you know, in terms of investment, you know, the kind of efforts that's being put into the healthcare infrastructure, say, you know, in Africa and for Africans. So talking about how the diaspora can get involved, I think would be a good thing to hear as well. So over to you.
I think that, you know, and I'll answer this broadly. I think that, you know, talking about messaging okay? I think that, things that we need to even start to address is deficiencies both on the type of messages and how they're conveyed, but also the ability of people who are on the other end of this message to understand that. So, health literacy, is a composite of many things, including things like educational level, means of communication, et cetera, et cetera. So, some of the things that drive, poor health literacy, and that makes people even more susceptible or vulnerable to misinformation, right? Because, you don't even have that sieve or background knowledge to even ask yourself an important question. Is this message I received or heard, is it accurate or inaccurate? If they're too scientific, if they're too nuanced, that I can't really grasp it. So, again, thinking just about Nigeria and Africa and thinking about what literacy rates are, education, how much, science, math, engineering are some of those key, courses that contribute to just collective IQ. I think that, again, it unmasks some of those deficiencies. So are we, how educated are the public? And then on our side, with the messaging, I think that we also need to, learn better. And sometimes, like I've mentioned, using language that people can understand. So for example, a webinar like this that's in English and it's not in Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba, Ijaw TV, or other, Efik, Ibibio, if we don't have that messaging, maybe we'll not be able to get to the villager in, who needs to understand, why do I need to wear a mask, or why am I getting this injection to prevent what and disease? I heard it can cause sterility or something. So again, these are very difficult issues to address. Some of them are really structural and require more investment than, government can do. And, just to piggyback onto this, I think that, sometimes in Nigeria and many African countries, we're very heavy dependent on what government can do. And I think that we really haven't identified ways, or at least ways to support the private sector, both profit and not-for-profit org structures to support some of the work we do. And I think that we all need to, figure out how to harness the strengths of both these approaches to addressing some of the, collective public health issues, health literacy, education, that raise the level of the population to the point where we can better understand things that are told us and grasp concepts and run with them. So it's a very complex issue. There's cultural, there's religious, there's some other influences. And so a message that can work in Kenya may not work in Nigeria. A message that works in Lagos may not work in Borno State, for example. So, and sometimes we learn best from people within their context. So making sure that, when we're thinking about problems, there's a broad representation in any work that we're doing to make sure that everyone's represented, so you can hear different viewpoints, and that's probably the best way to be able to respond. So that's a global view on how to address some of these issues. And maybe I would love to hear what either Prof or Prof Aliyu or Prof Rotimi would have to add to that, from a Nigerian standpoint.
Right, thank you, Onyema, for that, and thank you for all what you've been saying. I think it's been very useful. With regards to what the diaspora can do, there are various groups globally that are making contributions towards what's going on in Nigeria. In the United Kingdom, we have a group that is trying to work with the task force and with government. And apart from that, you have individuals that are sending messages, jingles, using comedians, people of influence to try and get the message across. For example, we enlisted the services of a Nigerian comedian to talk about social distancing, about wearing the mask in Nigerian language rather than English. We are prepared to work with government or NGOs and right down to the local government level. So people are ready to help. We also hope that the recipients are prepared to receive the information we want to give them. Like you said, you are not different from Nigerians. There are brilliant Nigerians at home. We need that enabling environment. We need the structures in place. And I have no doubt that what COVID has done, again, is to open our eyes back at home, that we need a better health structure, better health infrastructure. And I have no doubt that the legislative as well as executive arm of government will be looking into this. This is an opportunity for us to transform our services. And we in the diaspora will engage with government, will engage with policymakers. We're not coming from a top-down approach. We're all in this together. I mean, I've not come home this year. Normally, I would have been in Nigeria 6 times this year, but I haven't been able to come because of COVID. So we're all in it together. And I think as diasporans, we will join hands with you. And I must commend NIDCOM and the Chief Executive, Honorable Abike Dabiri, for the great work she's been doing. And I say so because I know that there are people in the diaspora who want to take equipment home, even PPEs home, and they run into difficulties with custom, with the port authority. But with the intervention of NIDCOM, we were able to surmount some of these challenges. So the promise I will make on behalf of diasporans is that we will continue to be proud of our country. We will continue to provide our services to our nation, Nigeria. That much I can reassure you, irrespective of the obstacles that we do face. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Abike, can I come in at this stage?
Yes, please.
Okay. First of all, again, I would like to echo what Professor Jalyesimi said with regards to NIDCOM, and appreciate you and your organization for really taking the unusual step of reaching out to people in the diaspora, of whom I'm actually part of, to enable those important channels of communication to be opened. I recall when we had the international travel portal, there were a lot of issues that we had to discuss at this sort of meeting, and it tremendously helped to push forward information on the importance of the portal and why we were doing certain things at certain points in time. Going straight to the question of how can diasporans help? Well, first of all, I think for most of us, we do have reach within government. A lot of us know people in government, whether it's legislators or executives, etc. And the first bit is to try and influence people in authority to think in a different way, to think more globally, to realize the importance of being part of a global community, and also the importance of having structures and institutions that would outlast individuals. Because it's only by having institutions and clear-cut policies that are based on sound science, evidence, that are also based on transparent relationships between arms of government and the private sector. It's the only way we can improve on basic science research in Nigeria. Secondly, I want to re-echo the issue of private sector engagement. The COVID response, what it has shown me more than anything else is the importance of engaging with the private sector. A lot of the work we've done in the PTF was actually supported by COVID. The funds that we were given by government, most of it, we still have it intact. We didn't have to use it because we realized the speed and the ability of the private sector to deliver within days or even hours compared to government bureaucratic processes. And we need to make use of this, both from the diaspora side as well as from the domestic side, and push through increased investment in health. We know some of the health services available in Nigeria, the hospitals, etc. But to date, if you look at Abuja, for instance, you can count with your hands the number of hospitals that would be equivalent. In fact, I'm not aware of any that's equivalent to a major institution, health institution in the UK. None. So if you fall sick, there are things that you need urgently, such as ventilation, etc. your likelihood of dying in such a setup is very high. So it's collectively for our own survival more than anything else that we really need to push for increased investment in health, whether it's coming from the diaspora or it's coming from domestic resources. For those of us that are in academia, we have to provide opportunity to the younger ones, training opportunities, mentoring, even if you can't bring them over to the UK or US, skill transfer for those that have already gone far in their careers. And also encouraging the universities to continue to prioritize science-related subjects, basic science-related subjects. Vaccines, like Onyema said, mRNA vaccines, we don't have the technology. If you ask us to produce an mRNA vaccine to manufacture it now in Nigeria, it would be one huge task that will probably take us years, if not, well, maybe months, or if not years. So we've got to start from the beginning. Let's encourage science among our young people. Let's link up with our universities for those of us that are in the diaspora. Let's create opportunities for the younger ones, and let's find a way to improve funding at the tertiary level. So I will stop here. Abike, but once again, thank you so much for the opportunity to join this. I think it's been a fantastic opportunity to hear from the horse's mouth, Onyema. I know he's going for his vaccine on the 11th. If he wants me to hold his hand virtually, I will be happy to. But thank you so much once again. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Obina.
Yes. Okay. Yes, go ahead, Honorable Abike.
Obina, I thought you will.
What's that?
Okay, we can round up now?
Yes, I think we'll just start to round up. I think we've gone way past our time. You know, very engaging conversation. Thank you, everyone. But Honorable, I'll give you a chance to give a few closing remarks, and then.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll make it very short. Like you said, we've gone beyond the time, but it's been very educative, very engaging. There are still more questions coming in on our various social media handles, but you can send those questions to admin@nidcom.gov.ng, and also I'll give them the other email that you have, admin@nidcom.gov.ng. I'm sure Dr. Onyema, Dr. Aliyu, and Professor Jalyesimi will answer all those questions. Thank you very much for this beautiful evening, Dr. Onyema. And well, Obina, you are not a twin. I'm not a twin. Dr. Jalyesimi, you're not a twin. But Dr. Onyema is a twin, and so is Dr. Aliyu. Maybe something about twins. So really, it's been great having this conversation. I know you're coming in sometime next year, Dr. Onyema. Please let us know. We're going to lay the red carpet, and we look forward to those pictures where you take your vaccine. But you've done a great job. We're proud of you. We wish you all the very best as you continue to rise on the top of your profession. And thank you for being proudly Nigerian. Thank you for making us all proud to be Nigerians. And thank you for what you've done this evening. And thanks for your humility. I knew having this conversation with you before now. I mean, you're so humble, so brilliant, so everything. Like I said, I spoke to your dad, also a fantastic gentleman, a few weeks ago. So thank you all of you for listening to this conversation. We'll be pushing out the link to everybody who wants to watch. And like I said, if you have more questions, send to us. Dr. Obina, Dr. Onyema, Obina, I promoted you.
I think the doctor.
We'd like to answer your questions. Dr. Jalyesimi, Professor Jalyesimi, thank you for what you've done for us this evening. You know, we always rely on you, and we keep saying we have the best everywhere in the world. Dr. Aliyu,
thank you.
My friend, my brother, thank you so much for all you've been doing. And I know that through you, you've told us we all should be careful. Maybe we're looking at another second wave of Nigeria. I pray it doesn't happen. So again, thank you, everybody. We appreciate you all, and we look forward to seeing you again. Obina, thank you very much. My partner, my friend. We keep on with our diaspora speaker series, and I know we continue to add value to everything we're doing as regards to diaspora. Thank you very much, and God bless you. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you, Abike.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, everybody, and thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to all the attendees. This was a very well attended event. Even on social media, the comments have been off the chart. People are already asking for part 2. Like Dr. Ogbuagu said, you know, there's going to be the Nollywood part 2, so we'll cut it off. We're just missing the soundtrack, you know, to put it in there. So please stay tuned for part 2, and then we'll definitely bring on a lot more information. But I think, you know, taking away from this, I think it's been a good session where we understand more about the vaccine, we understand more about how it impacts our environment, what we can do, and what we need to still do to keep safe. Wear the mask, stay away from people. We know that, it's not a lost cause with Nigeria. Nigeria can handle this. It will get to Nigeria. And we just need to be our brother's keeper in all of this. I think that's from my own understanding. So thank you again, Dr. Ogbuagu. Thank you, Professor Jalyesimi. Thank you, Dr. Aliyu, Honorable Abike Dabiri-Erewa. Thank you so much. And we look forward to more conversations. And everyone, please keep safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.